"I speak 9 languages," said the 11-year-old girl calmly, and then she began to read. The millionaire, who had started laughing, swallowed hard as the words came out perfectly from her mouth. "But before we continue this emotional story, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment with your city. If this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Every bit of support helps us keep sharing these inspiring stories." Now let's move on to the narrative. The air on the 67th floor of the Johnson Tower was as sterile and cold as the man who occupied it. Robert Johnson, at 49, was a titan of technology, a self-made billionaire with a net worth that floated just north of $1 billion. His office was a testament to his excess and his contempt for the world below. Walls of polished black Carrara marble absorbed the light. Expensive works of abstract art hung like trophies, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the financial district of Manhattan lay spread out like a miniature world. He saw the people scurrying on the streets as ants, insignificant, interchangeable, and utterly beneath him. His Patek Philippe watch, a $75,000 piece of engineering, felt like a shield, a constant reminder of the chasm between him and them. His favorite pastime was a game he called public humiliation, where he would use his wealth and status to break the spirits of those he considered inferior. That morning he had a new target. His assistant, a nervous young man named David, had informed him that Maria Rodriguez, the building's head cleaner for 8 years, was late. Her reason? She had to bring her 11-year-old daughter, Sophia, to work. A smirk stretched across Robert's face. This was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. When Maria and Sophia appeared, Maria's face was flushed with a mix of apology and shame. Her daughter's face was hidden behind a mess of dark hair, her small hands clutching the worn strap of a backpack. "Ms. Rodriguez," Robert began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Punctuality is a virtue, a simple concept, I would have thought. But then again, I suppose one can't expect much from someone with only a high school education. Can they?" Maria's eyes dropped to the floor, her shoulders slumping. Robert's gaze fell on Sophia. "And this must be the reason for your tardiness," he said, gesturing to the girl with a sweeping, dismissive hand. "The future of your family, I presume. Let's hope she's inherited more than just her mother's penchant for lateness." He had a tool for his game today. On his desk, secured in a velvet box, lay an ancient document. It was a parchment of mysterious origin, filled with characters from multiple languages, Mandarin, Arabic, Sanskrit, and others that even the most esteemed translators from Columbia and NYU had declared impossible to fully decipher. He'd bought it at an auction for a ridiculous sum, not for its historical value, but as a prop for his cruel parlor games. He held it up, the brittle paper rustling in his hand. "Do you know what this is, little girl?" he asked, a sadistic glee in his eyes. "This document has baffled the finest minds in this city, a document that speaks to the very pinnacle of human knowledge. I have it here, and the best and brightest have failed to crack its code. But I own it. What do you suppose that says about the world, Sophia slowly raised her head, her brown eyes meeting his with an unsettling lack of fear. "It says you also can't read it," she said, her voice small but clear. "So what's the difference between you and the smartest people? Or my mom? You all can't read it." Robert's cruel smile vanished. He had expected tears, stammering apologies, a crushing sense of inferiority. He had not expected this devastatingly simple and logical response. The girl's gaze was a mirror, reflecting his own arrogance back at him. It was a single perfect question that exposed the true nature of his game. It wasn't about superiority at all, but about a deep, gnawing insecurity. For the first time in years, Robert Johnson felt a flicker of something he had long forgotten: uncertainty. And he hated it. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "And what makes you so different from the rest of them, then? How many languages do you speak, little genius?" Sophia's gaze remained steady, unwavering. 9, she replied. The single word hung in the air, a challenge and a promise, a chasm of his own making that he was about to fall into. Robert Johnson's mind reeled. He'd expected a number, maybe 2, perhaps a smattering of phrases in a second language picked up from school. 9, however, was a claim so audacious it bordered on the absurd. His first thought was that the girl was lying. His second was that she was delusional. He settled on the first. 9? He repeated, a sarcastic laugh escaping his lips. And which mythical tongues do you command, pray tell? Sophia's voice was calm, devoid of any attempt to impress. She listed them off, each one a nail in the coffin of his prejudice. English, of course, Spanish, advanced, Mandarin, basic, Arabic, conversational, French, intermediate, Italian, fluent, German, basic, Russian, conversational, and ASL, fluent. The list was more than just a recitation of languages. It was a revelation of a hidden world, a world Robert Johnson had never bothered to look for. He was so accustomed to defining people by their jobs, their addresses, their tax brackets, that the idea of a child of a cleaning lady possessing such a rich inner life was an impossibility. His mind raced for a counter-argument, some way to regain control of the situation. He finally seized on the most obvious question. Where in God's name did you learn all of that? Are your parents secretly language professors moonlighting as custodians? A soft, sad smile touched Sophia's lips. No, she said quietly. I learned most of it at the New York Public Library. The New York Public Library, a place Robert had only ever seen from the back of his chauffeured car, a place he associated with the unwashed masses, with the dusty smell of old books and the faint scent of stale coffee. Sophia went on to explain, her voice a gentle, persuasive current. They have free programs there, tutors and teachers who are volunteers. A lot of them are immigrants or refugees, people who have jobs like my mum's, but who were professors, engineers, or artists back home. Robert's cynical mind tried to find the lie in her words, but he couldn't. Her voice carried the ring of truth. She spoke of Ahmed, a former Syrian university professor, who now delivered groceries but taught conversational Arabic on Saturdays. She mentioned Mrs. Wang, a retired director of linguistics from Beijing who worked as a caregiver and taught Mandarin in her spare time. She described Carmen, a Mexican immigrant who cleaned offices at night and taught Spanish grammar with a passion that made her students cry with joy. He suddenly saw the city differently. He had always seen it as a backdrop for his success, a playground of the rich. But Sophia's words painted a new picture, a vast, vibrant underground of forgotten knowledge, a community of people who were forced into menial jobs, but whose minds were brilliant and whose hearts were generous. He had spent his entire life looking down, but he had missed everything. The realization was a gut punch. And the document? Robert asked, the question barely a whisper. The one the professors at Columbia and NYU couldn't read? Sophia looked at the parchment again, her eyes narrowing in concentration. It's not one language, she said, and a new, almost playful light entered her eyes. It's a combination, layered. Each paragraph is a different language, but they all speak about the same thing, a theme. Her gaze, as she looked up at him, was no longer just a mirror. It was an open door, a profound invitation into a world he had judged and dismissed. He was standing on the precipice of a choice, a chance to abandon his arrogance and take a terrifying step into the unknown. A profound silence descended upon the grand office. The chimes of Robert's antique grandfather clock, usually a soothing metronome to his thoughts of conquest, now sounded like a death knell for his old life. He watched in stunned disbelief as Sophia's small finger traced the lines of the impossible document. She began to speak, and the words that flowed from her mouth were not just a translation, they were a revelation. She started with a paragraph composed of classical Mandarin characters, her tone becoming more formal, more resonant. She spoke of how the highest mountains are not those of stone and ice, but those of the human spirit. She then moved to a block of ancient Arabic script, her voice shifting to a rhythmic, poetic cadence. The desert has many grains of sand, she translated, her words hanging in the air like a proverb. But a truly rich man is not the one who counts them, but the one who can see a single drop of water and cherish it as a gift from God. Next came the Sanskrit, a language so old and sacred that it felt like it was breathing life into the sterile room. He who seeks knowledge in gilded halls and empty scrolls, she read, her voice a soft incantation, will find a harvest of ash. True wisdom does not reside in palaces of gold, but in hearts that beat with humility and compassion. Each line she spoke was a direct attack on the fortress of his ego, a mirror held up to the emptiness of his soul. Then came the Latin, a harsh, declarative tone that seemed to echo in the vast space. To see others as lesser, as ants beneath one's feet, is to declare oneself the poorest of all, for you have lost the ability to see the divine in a single human soul. Robert's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a random collection of proverbs. This was a document written for him. It was a cosmic indictment of his life, his philosophy, his very existence. Sophia's final translation came from a block of classical Persian. "Power is not the ability to humiliate," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "but the strength to lift others up. The greatest force on this earth is not wealth, but the simple act of human dignity." The last word hung in the air, a final damning verdict. Sophia didn't look at him with a triumphant smirk. Her face was one of serene sadness, as if she were mourning the life he had lived. He had brought her here to humiliate her, and in a few short minutes she had laid bare the fraud of his entire existence. His billions, his tower, his Patek Philippe watch. All of it felt cheap, hollow, and utterly worthless. The document, which he had bought as a symbol of his intellectual superiority, had become his personal confession, a testament to his spiritual poverty. He found himself unable to speak, the man who always had a crushing comeback, a witty retort, a withering dismissal. He had nothing. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. He had been so blind, so convinced of his own brilliance, that he had missed the most profound lesson of all. He had judged a woman by her cleaning uniform and a girl by her age, without ever once considering the extraordinary humanity that lay beneath the surface. And now he had to face the consequences of that monumental failure. For the first time in his life, Robert Johnson felt small. He had been the master of every room he entered, the architect of every conversation. Now he was a silent spectator in his own humiliation, a man stripped bare of his defenses. He looked at Sophia, at her calm, knowing eyes, and he saw not a child, but an ancient soul. "Who are you?" he asked, the question escaping his lips before he could stop it. It wasn't an accusation, it was a plea. Sophia's expression softened. "I'm exactly who you saw," she said simply. "I'm Maria's daughter. I go to PS 234. I'm just a kid who likes to read and believes everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." Her words hit him with a force that his billions never could. He had treated her mother like a piece of furniture for 8 years, a faceless uniform that existed only to keep his surroundings immaculate. He had never once asked her name, her story, or wondered what kind of person she was. And in that neglect, he had missed the most extraordinary person in his life. He looked at Maria, who stood frozen in place, a silent witness to her daughter's triumph. Her eyes were not filled with revenge, but with a quiet pride. "Why didn't you say anything?" Robert asked her, the question directed at a woman he had never truly seen before. Maria finally met his gaze. "I didn't have to," she said softly. "My daughter speaks for me. Her kindness, her intelligence, her strength. That's all I ever wanted to show you. That's my legacy." Robert slumped back in his leather chair, the luxurious material suddenly feeling cheap and unyielding. The silence that followed was a chasm of his own making, filled with years of unsaid apologies and unacknowledged humanity. He had built an empire of technology, but he had failed at the most basic human connection. His mind raced, desperately searching for a way to fix this, to claw back some semblance of his former self. But there was no going back. The old Robert Johnson was gone, a casualty of a little girl's truth. Sophia stepped forward, her small frame radiating a quiet authority. "There are conditions," she said, and Robert looked up, startled. "If you want to change, if you want me to help you, you have to do some things." He was used to making demands, not receiving them. But he nodded, a silent acknowledgement that he had lost all leverage. "First," Sophia began, her voice steady, "you have to apologize to my mum, sincerely, for the way you've treated her for 8 years. Her words hung in the air, a demand for a reckoning he had long avoided. The first step on his long, arduous journey to redemption was a simple act of humility he had never considered possible. The words felt alien on his tongue. They were thick with the dust of years of pride and neglect. Robert Johnson looked at Maria, at the lines etched around her eyes from years of hard work, at the quiet strength in her posture. He took a deep, shaky breath. "Maria," he began, his voice hoarse, I am truly sorry for everything, for the way I've treated you, for the things I've said, for not seeing you, for not seeing your daughter. It was not a speech. It was a confession. Maria's eyes welled up with tears, but she simply nodded, her hand gently touching her daughter's shoulder. It was a silent, powerful forgiveness that Robert felt in the core of his being. The weight on his chest, a burden he didn't even know he carried, began to lift. Second, Sophia continued, her list of demands a blueprint for his new life. You have to change how you treat all your employees, from the janitor to the CEO. Everyone. Robert had always seen his employees as cogs in a machine. Now he was being asked to see them as human beings. It was a terrifying prospect. And third, Sophia said, her small hand gesturing to the impossible document still on his desk, you have to use your wealth to lift people up, not to buy things that make you feel superior. My mum should get a job with a real salary, and you have to create a scholarship program for kids like me. He had spent his life accumulating wealth. Now, he was being told to give it away. The irony was not lost on him. And finally, Sophia concluded, a mischievous glint in her eyes, you have to learn a new language. You have to understand what it's like to be a student again, to be vulnerable, to learn from people who you think are beneath you. He was a man who had commanded boardrooms, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, and faced down hostile takeovers. Now, he was being told to go to a public library and learn a new language from a refugee. He was being asked to dismantle the very foundation of his identity. He had a choice. He could dismiss this all as a childish whim and go back to his life of isolated arrogance. Or he could take a leap of faith into a world he had long ignored. The choice was terrifying, but the alternative, the crushing emptiness of his old life, was even more so. Mandarin, Robert said, his voice surprisingly firm. I'll learn Mandarin. Sophia smiled. Good, she said. I'll be your first tutor. We'll start at the library, tomorrow. And so, the journey began. The next day, in a quiet corner of the New York Public Library's majestic Stephen A. Schwarzman building, a billionaire sat across from an 11-year-old girl, a small notebook in his hand. He was surrounded by a world he had long dismissed. The old books, the worn tables, the faint scent of coffee and humanity. It was a foreign land. He looked around and saw a world teeming with life he had never known, and for the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of hope. He was a student, a learner, a man with everything to gain and nothing to lose. The journey was long, but he had taken the first step. The library became Robert's new office. The grand, silent halls of the Stephen A. Schwarzman building, once just a backdrop, were now a sanctuary of humility. His teacher was Sophia, a patient, kind, and surprisingly demanding instructor. She made him practice every stroke, every tone, every character, his frustration building with each mistake. He was used to commanding, not learning. He was used to being the smartest man in the room, not the most ignorant. But Sophia's lessons extended far beyond the pages of his Mandarin textbook. She introduced him to the people she had spoken of. He met Ahmed, the Syrian professor, a man whose hands were rough from delivering packages, but whose mind was filled with the ancient poetry of the Middle East. Ahmed spoke of the lost libraries of Aleppo and the beauty of a language that could express a universe of emotion in a single word. He met Mrs. Wang, the former director of linguistics from Beijing, a tiny, kind woman who worked as a caregiver. She taught Robert that the true art of language was not in the words themselves, but in the silences between them, the shared understanding that transcended syntax. He met Carmen, the Mexican immigrant who cleaned offices at night. She taught him about the richness of Spanish, not just as a language of business or romance, but as a language of family, of food, of tradition. He found himself mesmerized by their stories, by the wisdom they carried, and by the dignity with which they lived their lives, despite the harsh realities of their circumstances. He saw their hands, rough with honest labor, and he saw a depth of knowledge and a breadth of experience that his billions could never buy. Robert's old life, the world of the Union Club and exclusive boardrooms, began to feel like a distant monochrome dream. His friends, Alexander Whitman and Sebastian Brooks, called him constantly. their voices full of concern and thinly veiled contempt. They couldn't understand why he was spending his time in a public library with the help. They saw his transformation as a betrayal of their shared system of privilege, a threat to the very foundation of their world. They tried to pull him back, to remind him of the life he was leaving behind. They spoke of the deals they were making, the money they were earning, the women they were impressing. They told him he was becoming a laughingstock, a cautionary tale. But their words, once a source of validation, now sounded hollow and pathetic. He saw them for what they were, men who had built their lives on the backs of others, who were just as empty and insecure as he had been. One day, while practicing his Mandarin characters, he realized a profound truth. His old life was not a life at all. It was a gilded cage. He had been a prisoner of his own arrogance, a king in an empty kingdom. The people he was now meeting, the ones he had once considered ants, were the true architects of the city, the ones who built its infrastructure, cleaned its streets, and, he was now discovering, held its deepest wisdom. The old life was a life of isolation. The new one was a life of connection. And he knew with a sudden joyful certainty that he could never go back. The confrontation was inevitable. Alexander Whitman and Sebastian Brooks, along with a cadre of their closest associates from the exclusive Union Club, descended upon Robert's office like vultures circling a carcass. They didn't call ahead. They simply walked in, their faces a mask of forced concern that barely concealed their contempt. Robert's new assistant, a young woman he had promoted from the mailroom, was visibly intimidated. "Robert," Alexander began, his voice dripping with false concern, "what is going on with you? We've been worried. You're not answering our calls. You're not attending our club meetings. And frankly, this talk about you spending your days in a public library is disturbing." Sebastian chimed in, his tone more aggressive. "People are talking, Robert. They're saying you've lost your mind. That you're giving away your money to children of immigrants. This is a threat to our entire system. You're making us look weak." The accusation was a slap in the face. They weren't concerned about him. They were concerned about the ripple effect of his transformation. They saw his newfound humility as a betrayal of their shared code of cruelty. They saw his empathy as a crack in the gilded armor they all wore. Robert leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped calmly on the desk. He no longer felt the need to prove himself. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain. "I'm not a threat to your system," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I am a threat to your delusion. I've lived in your world for 49 years. I've believed your lies and I've played your games. But I can't do it anymore. I've seen what's real, and it's not in a $1 billion tower or a $75,000 watch." His words sent a visible shudder through the group. They had come to lecture, to scold, to reclaim him. They had not expected a man so completely transformed. Alexander's face hardened. "You're making a mistake, Robert. We are your friends. We are your support system. We're giving you a chance to come back before you lose everything." Robert looked at them, and for the first time he saw them not as his equals, but as prisoners of their own making. He saw the fear in their eyes, the desperate need to cling to a status quo that was slowly crumbling beneath their feet. "You're not my friends," he said, his voice no longer quiet, but filled with a new, powerful conviction. "You're the guards of a prison. You live in a world of mirrors and illusions, and you're terrified to look outside. I've spent my life looking down at people, thinking I was a god, but I was just a fool. And now I'm finally free." He stood up, his gaze sweeping over them. "You can go back to your Union Club and your empty lives. I'm going to the library. I'm going to learn how to be a person, and I'm going to use my money to build something real, something that matters. I suggest you do the same before it's too late." The ultimatum was not theirs to give. It was his. And as they stood there, silent and stunned, he knew he had won. He had chosen his new life, and in that moment he had truly, finally set himself free. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of action. Robert didn't just talk about change, he enacted it. He announced the creation of the Sofia Rodriguez Scholarship Program, endowed with an initial $100 million. The money wasn't for elite, private schools, but for underprivileged children in the city's public schools, the ones he had once dismissed as unworthy. Maria, who had been promoted to Director of Human Development at Johnson Tower, oversaw the program's initial implementation, her quiet dignity now an essential part of his new corporate culture. The applications poured in, thousands of them, and as he read the stories of the applicants, Robert felt a deep and abiding shame for his past life. He read about Elena, the daughter of a Guatemalan immigrant who worked as a domestic worker who wanted to study engineering at Columbia. He read about Carlos, a son of a construction worker who dreamed of being a doctor and going to Cornell. He read about Amina, a Syrian refugee who had taught herself English by watching old movies and who wanted to study linguistics at NYU. He realized what Sophia had told him was the absolute truth. Talent was uniformly distributed, but opportunity was not. He had been living in a bubble, a gilded cage that had prevented him from seeing the raw potential of the world around him. He had thought he was a genius for building a tech empire, but the true genius was in the hearts and minds of these children, who were building their dreams from scratch with nothing but their own determination. He also started a massive overhaul of his own company. He instituted a mentorship program, pairing his top executives with employees from the lower rungs of the corporate ladder. He created a new department, the Office of Dignity and Inclusion, with Maria at the helm. He saw his employees not as cogs but as people, with dreams and fears and families. He made a point of learning their names, asking about their lives, and listening to their stories. The change was slow but steady. At first there was suspicion, then a hesitant trust, and finally a quiet loyalty. His employees, who had long worked in a culture of fear, were now working in a culture of respect. The results were immediate and tangible. Productivity went up, employee turnover plummeted, and innovation flourished. The company wasn't just making money anymore, it was making a difference. As he watched his new empire grow, he realized that true wealth was not measured in dollars, but in the lives he was now touching. He had found a purpose, a reason to be that his old life had never provided. He was not just building a company, he was building a community. And at the heart of it all was a quiet, unassuming little girl who had challenged his arrogance and showed him a world he never knew existed. The old Robert Johnson was a ghost. The new one was just beginning to live. The Jacob K. Javits Convention Center, a sprawling glass and steel monument to commerce, was not a place Robert Johnson had ever associated with personal triumph. But today, it was. He stood on a stage, a backdrop of a massive screen showing images of smiling, diverse faces, and looked out at a sea of people. This was the first graduation ceremony of the Sofia Rodriguez Scholarship Program. 120 students from working-class and immigrant families were there, all of them having received full scholarships to prestigious universities. He saw the same names he had read on their applications: Elena, Carlos, Amina, and many others. Their faces, once just pictures on a screen, were now alive with joy and pride. Maria, now the official director of human development for the Johnson Foundation, took the stage and delivered a speech that brought the audience to its feet. She spoke of the program's impressive statistics. 97% of the students had maintained a GPA above 3.5, and 28 of them had already committed to becoming mentors for the next class. The language program had expanded to 10 public libraries, with over 450 students learning from a new generation of volunteer teachers. She spoke of the power of education, not as a tool for personal gain, but as a bridge to a better future. When it was Robert's turn to speak, he felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced since his first public pitch decades ago. He walked to the podium, the lights blinding him, and looked out at the faces in the audience. He saw the parents, their faces etched with relief and pride. He saw the students, their eyes shining with hope. And he saw Sophia, sitting in the front row, a small, knowing smile on her face. He didn't pull out a pre-written speech. He spoke from the heart. 3 months ago, he began, his voice surprisingly steady, I was a completely different man. I was rich, powerful, and absolutely empty inside. A wave of whispers swept through the crowd. He continued, his words a confession and a testament. I built my life on the belief that a man's worth was measured by his dollars, and that my intelligence was superior to everyone else's. I saw the world in black and white, and I saw people as either useful or disposable. He paused, a lump in his throat. And then a little girl named Sofia Rodriguez showed me a world I never knew existed. She showed me that true intelligence is measured by the wisdom in your heart, that wealth is not something you accumulate, but something you share, and that a single act of kindness can change a life and a community. He looked at Sophia, a single tear running down his cheek. "Sophia," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "you taught me that the education I was so proud of was a privilege, and that the real work is making sure it is a right for every American, no matter where they come from." The applause was deafening. It wasn't a polite ovation. It was a roar of genuine emotion, a collective recognition of the man he had been and the man he had become. The stage, the audience, the entire convention center, it was no longer just a backdrop. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of transformation. He had finally found his purpose, and it was better than $1 billion. The ceremony was over, but the story had just begun. The national news picked up on Robert Johnson's transformation, the dramatic shift from corporate villain to philanthropic hero. The headlines were everywhere. The billionaire who found his soul, from tycoon to humanitarian. The little girl who taught a mogul a lesson. He was no longer just a man in a tower. He was a symbol of change, a beacon of hope for a world that was hungry for good news. His old friends, Alexander and Sebastian, were furious. They had been exposed, their names now synonymous with the very arrogance and cruelty that Robert had so publicly disavowed. They tried to fight back, to discredit him, to paint his transformation as a cynical PR stunt. But their words were empty. The public saw the faces of the scholarship recipients, heard the stories of the immigrant teachers, and saw the profound change in the man himself. Robert, for his part, was unconcerned with their attacks. He had left that world behind. His days were now filled with meetings with city officials, non-profit leaders, and community organizers. He was no longer just a donor. He was a partner. He learned about the inner workings of public education, the challenges faced by refugee families, and the incredible resilience of a city that was constantly being remade by the dreams of newcomers. Maria, now the executive director of the Robert Johnson Foundation, had become a national figure in her own right. She traveled to different cities, sharing the story of the foundation and inspiring others to create similar programs. Her quiet dignity and powerful story resonated with people, and she became a voice for the voiceless. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was an architect of change, a leader in a new kind of social justice. Sophia, now 12, was still just a kid who loved to read. She still went to the library, still tutored Robert in Mandarin, and still had a quiet, disarming way of seeing the world. But she had also become a powerful voice in her own right. She spoke at conferences, giving her perspective on what it means to be a young person in a world filled with both prejudice and promise. The story was no longer just about Robert's transformation. It was about the ripple effect of a single, powerful moment. It was about how a little girl's truth could shake a man's world to its core, and how that man's change could, in turn, create waves that transformed an entire city. It was a testament to the power of human connection, and a promise that the world could be a better place, one conversation, one act of kindness, at a time. The old world was dying, and a new one was being born, a world where dignity was currency, and wisdom was found in the most unexpected of places. 1 year after their initial meeting, Robert stood on the stage of the Jacob K. Javits Convention Center once again. This time, he was not there to celebrate a single program, but to announce the creation of something much larger, the Sofia Rodriguez Foundation for Human Dignity. It was endowed with $400 million, a massive sum that would be used to expand educational programs, not just across the United States, but into the very countries from which so many immigrants had come. His plan was ambitious: to build bridges between cultures, to create a pipeline of opportunity for the children of immigrants and refugees, and to prove once and for all that a person's worth was not defined by their country of origin. He had partnered with 15 American universities and 10 Latin American universities, creating a network of educational institutions committed to the same vision. Maria, his former cleaning lady, was now the foundation's executive director, a nationally recognized innovator in inclusive education. Robert spoke of his past, of the man he used to be, and of the profound lesson he had learned. "I spent my life believing that wealth was a shield against the world," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "But it was a cage. Sophia taught me that true wealth is not something you accumulate, it's something you share. It's not about how many dollars you have, but about how many lives you can touch. He looked at Maria and then at Sophia, who was standing beside her. Maria, you have shown me the true meaning of grace and forgiveness. And Sophia, you are the reason I am here today. You taught me that the most powerful thing a person can have is not a bank account, but a heart filled with empathy. You taught me that the greatest knowledge is not found in a book, but in the simple act of treating every single human being with dignity. As the applause erupted, he felt a sense of peace he had never known. His old life had been a chase for more money, more power, more things. This new life was a journey of giving, of connecting, of building. He was no longer a man defined by his possessions, but by his purpose. He had traded his gilded cage for a life of service, and in doing so, he had found a kind of freedom that his billions could never buy. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of one moment, one conversation, to change everything. The story of Robert Johnson's transformation was a well-known tale, but the true star of the show was Sophia. At 12, she was poised and articulate beyond her years. At the Foundation's official press conference, held at the sprawling Javits Center, she was invited to speak. She walked to the podium with a quiet confidence that belied her age, her voice a soft but clear counterpoint to the thunderous applause that had greeted Robert. "I'm just a kid from the Upper West Side," she began, a hint of a smile on her face. "My mum works hard to give me a good life. I go to public school. I like to read. And I believe that every single one of us, no matter where we come from, deserves to be treated with dignity." She spoke directly to the young people in the audience, especially the children of immigrants. To all the kids out there who are struggling to learn a new language, to make new friends, to fit in, I want you to know that your story matters. Your voice matters. Don't let anyone tell you that you are less than because of your name, your clothes, or your parents' job. Her message was powerful and poignant. She spoke of how her parents and the volunteer teachers at the library had taught her that wisdom and knowledge were not bound by class or status. She spoke of the courage it takes to leave your home and start over in a new country. She spoke of the importance of education as a bridge between cultures, a tool that could build a better world. "Mr. Johnson and I are living proof that one person's change can create a wave that transforms an entire community," she said, her eyes meeting his. "He learned from me, but I also learned from him. I learned that even the most broken person can be mended, and that even the most hardened heart can be softened by a little bit of empathy. The future we are building is a place where education is a right, not a privilege, and we don't have to wait until we are adults to start building it. We can start now." As she finished her speech, the entire room stood up and erupted in applause. It was not just for the words she had spoken, but for the symbol she had become. She was a testament to the idea that a single person, no matter how young or how small, could have a profound impact on the world. She was the living embodiment of the Foundation's mission, a bright, shining light that had pierced the darkness of one man's arrogance, and in doing so had created a ripple effect that would change the lives of thousands. The legacy of dignity was in her hands, and she was carrying it forward with grace, intelligence, and an unwavering belief in the goodness of humanity. The impact of the Sofia Rodriguez Foundation for Human Dignity was immediate and widespread. Other major corporations and philanthropists, inspired by Robert Johnson's public transformation, began to replicate his model. News stories chronicled similar programs being established in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston, all focusing on providing educational opportunities to underprivileged communities. The narrative of wealth and power began to shift from one of accumulation to one of social responsibility. Robert found himself in a new role, not just as a benefactor, but as a mentor to other billionaires and CEOs who sought his advice. He spoke of the emptiness of his former life and the profound satisfaction of his new one. He taught them that the most valuable asset they had was not their money, but their ability to influence others for good. He was a living parable, a cautionary tale of what a life of arrogance could lead to, and a living testament to the redemption that was possible through a single act of humility. The program was already making a tangible difference. The initial 120 scholarship recipients were excelling in their universities, and many were already volunteering to mentor the next generation. They were not just receiving an education, they were becoming leaders in their own right, a new generation of changemakers who were breaking the cycle of poverty and exclusion. The most profound change, however, was in the relationship between Robert, Maria, and Sophia. They had become an unlikely family, bound not by blood, but by a shared purpose. Robert learned to see Maria not just as an employee, but as a wise and compassionate woman who had taught him the meaning of forgiveness. He learned to see Sophia not as a child, but as an old soul, a spiritual guide who had led him out of the wilderness. He often found himself at the library, still practicing his Mandarin, still learning from the volunteer teachers. He was no longer just a student, he was a member of the community. He was just Robert, a man who was still learning, still growing, still trying to be better. He had traded the isolation of his tower for the warmth of human connection, and he had found a home in the most unexpected of places. The story of Robert Johnson was no longer just his. It was the story of a community, a city, and a nation that was slowly but surely learning to see itself anew. A year after the launch of the Sofia Rodriguez Foundation, Robert sat in his office on the 67th floor. The black marble walls still gleamed, but they no longer felt cold. The artwork on the wall still commanded millions, but they no longer felt like trophies. The view of the city was still the same, but his perspective had changed completely. He no longer saw ants, he saw people, millions of them, with millions of stories, dreams, and a deep well of untapped potential. Sophia and Maria walked into the office, their faces lit with a quiet joy. Robert stood up, a genuine smile on his face. He no longer needed a Patek Philippe watch to feel his worth. His worth was in the foundation, in the people he was helping, in the woman who had become his partner in change, and in the little girl who had taught him everything he needed to know. "How do you feel?" Maria asked, her voice soft. Robert looked out at the city, a city that had once been his playground and was now his project. "I feel alive," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I am a part of something bigger than myself. My money used to be a wall, now it's a bridge." He looked at Sophia. "You saved my life," he said, the words a simple truth. "You taught me that true power is not in the ability to humiliate, but to elevate. That true wisdom is not in what you know, but in how you treat others, and that the greatest wealth of all is not something you can count, but something you can share." Sophia smiled, a small, knowing smile that was a testament to her profound wisdom. "We just showed you what was already there, Mr. Johnson," she said. "The talent, the dignity, the kindness, it was always there. You just had to look up to see it." The story of Robert Johnson would be told for generations. It would be a story not of a billionaire who made a fortune, but of a man who found his soul. It would be a story about a little girl who, with nothing but her knowledge and her kindness, brought a giant to his knees and taught him a lesson that would change not just his life, but the lives of thousands. It was a testament to the idea that prejudice is a prison, and that true competence, when met with courage and humility, can break down the walls that divide us and build bridges that connect us all. The legacy was not in the tower or in the bank account, but in the human heart, and it was a legacy that would last forever.